15 years ago, in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing, just 4 days after the bombing, President Bill Clinton, who was then in his first term, spoke at a prayer service in Oklahoma City.
I've received a lot of letters in these last terrible days. One stood out because it came from a young widow and a mother of 3 whose own husband was murdered with over 200 other Americans when Pan Am 103 was shot down. Here is what that woman said I should say to you today. The anger you feel is valid, but you must not allow yourselves to be consumed by it. The hurt you feel must not be allowed to turn into hate, but instead into the search for justice. The loss you feel must not paralyze your own lives. Instead, you must try to pay tribute to your loved ones by continuing to do all the things they left undone, thus ensuring they did not die in vain. Wise words from one who also knows.
President Clinton also that day addressed the country at large and addressed the climate in which the bombing took place, the movement that the bomber emerged from.
To all my fellow Americans beyond this hall, I say, one thing we owe those who have sacrificed is the duty to purge ourselves of the dark forces which gave rise to this evil. They are forces that threaten our common peace, our freedom, our way of life. Let us let our own children know that we will stand against the forces of fear. When there is talk of hatred, let us stand up and talk against it. When there is talk of violence, let us stand up and talk against it. In the face of death, let us honor life.
Today, President Clinton looked back at Oklahoma City from 15 years' distance in a speech that he gave in Washington, and he turned to some of the same concerns he was just describing.
We can't let the debate veer so far into hatred that we lose focus of our common humanity. It's really important. We can't ever fudge the fact that there is a basic line dividing criticism from violence or its advocacy. And that the closer you get to the line and the more responsibility you have, the more you have to think about the echo chamber in which your words resonate. What we learned from Oklahoma City is not that we should gag each other or that we should reduce our passion for the positions we hold, but that the words we use really do matter, because there's this vast echo chamber, and they go across space and they fall on the serious and the delirious alike. They fall on the connected and the unhinged alike.
Within 4 months of the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh was charged in federal court with having committed that act. Nearly 6 years after that, in June 2001, Mr. McVeigh was executed. Joining us now for the interview tonight is Bud Welch. Bud Welch is the father of Julie Welch, his 23-year-old daughter, who died along with 167 other Americans in the Oklahoma City bombing 15 years ago. Mr. Welch is also president of Murder Victims Families for Human Rights. Bud Welch, thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
Over the years, you have spoken publicly about the bombing, about anger and revenge and forgiveness. On these anniversaries, do you feel like the country appropriately marks what happened in Oklahoma City?
Yeah, I really think the country does. It's, of course, you know, there's less each year, a little bit less, except certainly the 10th anniversary and now the 15th anniversary. And each year the pain gets a little less, but that's difficult to deal with because you know, I always say that when your parents die, you go to the hilltop and you bury them. When your children die, you bury them in your heart, and it's forever. It never goes away.
You testified at Terry Nichols' sentencing hearing. You testified against him receiving the death penalty. He did end up getting life without parole. I know, sir, that you were opposed to Timothy McVeigh being executed. How did you come to that position?
I reached that point probably about a year after the bombing, close to a year. All my life I had always opposed the death penalty. I just thought it was something that society should not be doing. And after Julie's death, I was so full of revenge and hate that I had to get retribution in some way. So I was for the death penalty probably for the first year. And after recognizing that killing Tim McVeigh was not part of my healing process, then I was able to move forward.
I know that you sought out and met Timothy McVeigh's father in 1998. You said after the meeting with Mr. McVeigh's father that he was a bigger victim of the Oklahoma City bombing than you were. What made you feel that way?
Well, because I travel all over the world. I've spoken thousands of times, and each time I speak, I'm able to tell stories about Julie and some wonderful things that she did as a child growing up, and her education and such. And I kind of keep her alive by doing that. But Bill is never able to publicly say anything positive about his son. And I've been told by family members that and neighbors that he was a good kid, he was a good student, and of course he served in the Gulf War and came back apparently with PTSD, and he and Terry Nichols had served in the same unit together. And so I guess that was kind of the result of what happened in war.
You're an activist now against the death penalty. You've called executions staged political events. What do you mean by that, and how do you try to bridge the gap between other people who are families of murder victims who feel opposite than you do, to feel the opposite way that you do about capital punishment?
Well, I think the main thing about other family members is after an execution happens, I think they recognize that really killing that other person is not part of their healing process. We're told that it is by the prosecutors. And prosecutors are mainly district attorneys that are elected. And they have to prove that they're tough on crime. They pound on the podium when they're running for re-election to try to prove that they're, as I say, the baddest ass in the jungle. And we vote for them. And governors do much the same way, except the political issue is not as powerful as it once was, because we're having anti-death penalty people elected to public office now.
Mr. Welch, one last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I don't want you to feel like you have to comment on this if you don't want to, but I would be interested in knowing what you thought about the current political climate. Hearing those comments from President Clinton both now and 15 years ago, a lot of people trying to figure out now if there are parallels in today's politics to what was going on in the early 90s. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, my theory is that there is some. And what this reminds me of, what's going on now, it reminds me very much of the 1960s and the 1970s of desegregation. We're kind of seeing that same old ugly head rise again, and that disturbs me a lot.
Bud Welch, the father of Julie Welch and president of Murder Victims Families for Human Rights, leading up to this very difficult anniversary, sir. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
And a reminder, our 2-hour special documentary, The McVeigh Tapes, will air on Monday during this hour, 9 p.m. Eastern, here on MSNBC. It draws on dozens of hours of audio interviews of Timothy McVeigh conducted in prison that have not been previously heard. You can see some clips from the film. You can see some behind-the-scenes video online right now at our blog, which is maddowblog.msnbc.com.